Now, once more, I find myself on the defensive side of the ball in this cancellation. Though, as always, the objective is to make a play, get the turnover, put the offense on defense. That's why I'm playing in the dime right now, 6 DBs on the field, free safety back deep, ready to grab the pick. Kind of losing track of the point I was trying to make with this analogy. Anyway, the point is this weekend, I was again the subject of outrage, and this is embarrassing for me as someone who's normally quite meek and gentle and non-confrontational, prefers to shrink away from the spotlight. I also consider myself to be a people pleaser, and I have other deluded ideas about my own personality, but we won't continue down that path right now. What upset the internet this time is a discussion that began on this podcast on Friday. I read a comment from a listener during the Reading the Comments segment of the show, where he asked whether his fiance's refusal to take his name upon marriage should be considered a red flag. And I said that not only is it a red flag, but it's a deal breaker. As a man, I would not marry a woman who didn't want to share my name. I would recommend that other men draw the same line. Now, I repeated this point on Twitter later that afternoon. Everything that followed is therefore really the fault of the listener who brought this subject up. I hope you're happy, sir. Look at what you've done. This is on you. So over the course of the next 3 days, a familiar chain of events followed. Thousands of people very upset that I would suggest that women ought to take their husband's name. The fact that I would call this issue a deal breaker was all the more abhorrent to the outraged masses. They've let me know that I'm a sexist, a misogynist, a bad husband, a tyrant, a bigot, a barbarian. One guy said that my opinion on the subject is evidence that I might be murderous and actually a physical danger to my family just because I want to share my name with them. Others went a different direction, saying that my perspective proves that I'm a sexually repressed virgin, a fact that will no doubt come as a great shock to the mother of my 4 children. But rather than give a general overview, I think it'd be helpful in this case to read a few of these specific responses. And this, I think, is a good representative sample. I'm choosing only from the blue check squad, verified accounts, media people, authors, academics, and so on. So here are a few of them. Here's what they were saying. Bethany says, I really don't hold much importance to my surname, a random name my granddad chose in a pub after moving to England. My mom has a different surname now too, but I definitely would keep my name just to spite angry men. Steph says, this is so toxic. Women do not belong to men. Therefore, it isn't a requirement for us to be branded with your surname. It's a woman's choice. It's rare to hear of men taking women's surnames, so if you won't do the same for us, keep quiet, LOL. Rachel says, would consider it a deal breaker if any boyfriend expected me to take his name. Women have their own identities. Any man who expects a woman to give hers up for him without discussion clearly doesn't fully grasp that. Heather says, damn, how do I break it to my fiance that after 11 years, we're going to have to end things because I'm not planning to change my name? Is that something I do over text or... And Amy says, I'm Amy Alcon. I've always been Amy Alcon, and even if I weren't an author, etc., marriages may come and go. I'm me for a lifetime, and my name reflects that. Of course, the really funny thing about all this, and most of the rest of the responses from feminists on the subject, is that they all seek to prove that they're strong and independent women by refusing to take their husbands' names and instead keeping their fathers' names. Quite literally participating in the patriarchy while pretending to dismantle it. The other thing, almost as funny, is that each response only underscores rather than undermines the original point I was trying to make. Bethany says that she would refuse to take her husband's name purely out of spite. Now, fortunately for her, this probably won't ever come up. I mean, she can actually force her cats to take whatever name she wants to give them. But still, she confesses to being driven by spite. Steph and Rachel see the unity of sharing a name as branding. They would consider it a deal breaker in the other direction if their future husband dared to request that they have a shared family name. Heather says that she's getting married to her boyfriend after 11 years and doesn't plan to take his name. 11 years. This is someone whose commitment issues are probably terminal at this point. Doubly so for Amy Alcon, who says, again, marriages may come and go. So you see in these answers, not just that cat ownership tends to make women very bitter, but also evidence of 2 other things. One, that the trend to move away from sharing the husband's name is driven primarily by an ideologically fueled hatred of our cultural traditions. And 2, that it's a symptom of a society that fears commitment. So let's talk about both of these in reverse order. Starting with 2. Marriage, if it's anything worth doing, is the bonding of 2 people into one marital unit. It is a union. It is a decision to share your life, and even in many ways to share your identity with somebody else. It's not that you lose your identity when you get married, but rather that your identity is changed, and it's bonded to this other person, fulfilled by them, and by the love you share. If this all sounds like a bunch of hocus pocus to you, that's fine, but please don't ever get married. I mean, why would you? If you don't believe in what I'm saying, then you don't believe in marriage. And the worst thing you can do when you don't believe in marriage is get married. If you do believe in marriage, then the very first thing you should do, the very first thing you should want to do, is come together under the same name. Is this a symbolic move? Yes, but marriage is symbolic. It's real, but it's also symbolic. Your name is real and also symbolic. You know what? So we know what sharing a name symbolizes. It symbolizes unity, commitment, togetherness, a shared life. What then does not sharing a name symbolize? You can't say it symbolizes nothing. It's going to symbolize something. That the decision to keep your own name is a symbolic gesture in its own right. What is it symbolizing? It symbolizes separation, detachment, disunion. Names are important. Everyone recognizes that at some level. The left recognizes it, which is why they make such a big deal out of demanding that people respect the new name of a trans person after they, quote, transition. To call somebody by their old name, their dead name as it's called, is an egregious offense. Why? Because names matter. The symbolism in a name is profound. John Proctor in The Crucible would rather be marched to the gallows than sign his name on a false confession. He was willing to give the false confession. He was willing to have the whole town told that he gave it. But he couldn't sign his name on the paper. He chose death rather than that. Why? Because it's his name. It's the name that his sons will carry down to their children and through the ages. He couldn't stand to sully it. In our deluded yet materialistic and utilitarian age, we don't understand things like dignity and symbolism. We pretend not to even understand why the symbolism of a shared marital name is so crucial. And yet the people on that side admit to the truth when they say something like marriages come and go. They see marriage as temporal and fleeting, while names are deep and rich and permanent. But marriage is supposed to be deep and rich and permanent also, which is why it should be formed under a shared name. But then, why share the man's name and not the woman's? Well, a big part of the answer for me is that I believe the man is supposed to be the head of the family. That may be unfashionable to say, but I care about fashionable opinions about as much as I care about the outrage from childless cat ladies. But putting that aside, here's another reason. Because it's a significant and enduring cultural tradition. As already established, we live in a utilitarian age and also a stupid and shallow age. So we tend to look at tradition as totally unimportant, superfluous, or worse. We think that it's noble to break traditions just for the sake of breaking them. We hate traditions. We feel oppressed by them because traditions come from our ancestors, and we think that our ancestors should have no say in how we live our lives, even though we live in the civilization they gave us. I reject that attitude. I despise it, actually. I think that if you're going to dismantle a tradition, you better have a good reason. And the reason shouldn't be indifference or spite or half-baked notions of female empowerment. You know, G.K. Chesterton said that there are many fences in the world that are worth tearing down. But you damn well better understand why the fence was erected before you demolish it. Tearing down fences on a whim because they obstruct the path you wanted to walk is foolish and arrogant and a good way to get your face eaten by a Rottweiler. A similar thing can be said about our cultural fences, our traditions, which these days we dismantle with no notion as to why, no coherent reason. And the result is that we lose the sturdy and beautiful things our ancestors gave us, and we replace those things with nothing at all. Sharing the husband's name is, among other things, a meaningful tradition dating back centuries. There are those who want to discard this tradition, like they discarded so many others, which speaks not only to their ignorance and their contempt for their own history and the voice of their ancestors, but also for their disregard. It speaks to their disregard for the whole institution of marriage. That's why I said what I said, and I stand by it. And why I say now to those who are upset about it, that you are, once again, I'm terribly afraid to say, canceled. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.